Quinnen Williams gets his contract extension. It's a great day to be a Jets fan. We'll discuss why today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Friday, July 14th, 2023, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Give it a 5-star review if you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, or a big thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube and like what you see. The Jets have reached a contract extension with Quinnen Williams. We're going to do the show for the second straight day. I wanted to do a mailbag, but the Jets and the NFL have had other plans. Yesterday, we had to talk about the Jets getting hard knocks, and bigger news today because the Jets have reached a long-term deal with their best player, Quinnen Williams, who the Jets drafted third overall back in 2019, who was entering the final year of his rookie contract. It's the fifth year of his rookie contract. So the way NFL contracts work, if you're not familiar, is they are 4-year contracts for first-round picks, but the team has an option for a fifth year, and the Jets, of course, picked up the fifth-year option for Quinnen Williams. So he was entering the final season of his contract. There was a lot of talk this offseason about whether this deal would get done or not. Quinnen Williams was quite vocal that he wanted to get his contract situation settled sooner rather than later, and it has been settled. The Jets and Williams agreed to a 4-year contract extension worth $96 million. $66 million of that is guaranteed. So very lucrative deal for Quinnen Williams. And, you know, I get a lot wrong here, so I'm going to just enjoy the fact that I was actually right about something, because if you're an everydayer, you know this because you heard yesterday's show. Yesterday at the end of the show, I talked about Hard Knocks and how one of the most famous subplots of the 2010 Hard Knocks season, the last time the Jets had the show, was the Darrelle Revis holdout. And I said I did not think Quinnen Williams was going to hold out. And I did not think that would be an ongoing storyline. And now it's not, because the Jets and Williams reach a long-term contract extension. You know, if you've been following the Jets for a couple decades like I have, you've seen some trends with this team that kind of repeat themselves over and over. And one of those trends is that when you deal with high-profile players, or when the team deals with high-profile players, guys who have ascended to star level, and there have been regrettably few of these players over the last couple of decades, it always feels like the contract negotiations have gotten more acrimonious than they needed to be. It always felt like even when you eventually reach a long-term deal, there was a lot of bad blood, and it never did not need to drag out as long as it did. And sometimes there have been high-profile players who have been traded. You know, Darrelle Revis is an example, John Abraham, Jamal Adams. In some cases, the deals actually worked out pretty well for the Jets. I mean, I think you would do that Jamal Adams trade over 10 times out of 10. You would do the Jamal Adams trade over 11 times out of 10 if you had the option. But it's part of a longer-term trend where it just felt like it did not need to get to this point with these players. And I'm happy to see that the Jets, and maybe this is a sign the team's finally figured things out and starting to move in the right direction. Jets and Williams were able to work this out before it got really negative. Now I know Quinnen Williams was, making a few comments about how he was unhappy this offseason. I know he did not show up at the OTAs, but that's pretty par for the course. And when you looked at things this offseason, it always felt like this dead period between the end of the offseason program and training camp was probably the most likely time for a deal like this to happen, because in the early stages of the offseason, Jets were kind of working on a big trade. You may have heard about that trade for Aaron Rodgers, which dragged on for quite a while, but that really occupied the Jets' attention. And then during that period, they also had to sign other free agents. And by the way, they were also scouting for the draft. They were preparing for the draft. They were going to pro days. They were going to the combine. So there was a lot going on. It felt like the Quinnen Williams contract, he may not have loved it, but it was going to be kind of on the back burner. It would be something they'd get before, if it happened, it would happen right before the start of training camp. So good news there. I'm glad to see that this is taken care of. I always think when you're dealing with star level players, and Quinnen Williams is a star level player, it's better to be proactive. Yeah, they could have let this play out this year, and they could have put him on the franchise tag. I think you just want to get these situations resolved sooner rather than later. The word distraction's been thrown around a lot this week with the Jets talking about hard knocks coming. And if you did not listen to yesterday's show, you can tune into that. I gave some thoughts on that, this is the team in the biggest media market in the country. They just traded for one of the most high profile players on the planet. This team's got to deal with the outside noise, whether it's hard knocks cameras or whether it's, just a regular daily grind where you're meeting with all the beat writers the Jets have. And the Jets in New York, you have more beat writers than you do anywhere else. So there's more scrutiny. There's talk radio is obviously intense. You have podcasts like this that cover you every day. You have to deal with that. One thing that could be a distraction if the Jets did not get this done, if the Jets took the mindset that we're going to play this out and we always have the franchise tag next year, that's actually something that I think could be a distraction for this team, because you want to have good feelings going in the locker room heading into the season. There's a lot of excitement around this team right now. You can tell the players are really happy to have Aaron Rodgers on this football team. You don't want any negativity entering the locker room. And Quinnen Williams is a professional. I have no doubt he'd go out and have a good season. But you don't want a guy, and you see this across the league all the time. You don't want a guy wondering, does this team really want me? Because that's the type of thing, sometimes it doesn't matter, but sometimes it can snowball. Sometimes it sends, it just creates a negative atmosphere within an NFL locker room. And now Quinnen Williams is going to go in. He's going to be happy, to the extent things were, I really don't think things got that bad in this situation. I think that this was actually, again, I give the Jets credit here because they were more proactive than they've been in the past in these situations. And I'm not saying this is Joe Douglas. I'm saying this is something that's been going on for 20 years since Woody Johnson took over the team. Jets were proactive. So got plenty of, now there'll be a lot of good feelings around this team. Quinnen Williams is going to be happy. He's been taken care of. This thing is not on his mind anymore. A lot you can feel good about with this team. And, I always believe in this. I think that when a player, this is just something I think is NFL team building 101. When you have a player who's great for your team, you keep him. This is the type of guy you stretch for. I think that too many times in recent years, the Jets have kind of stretched for guys outside their organization. And that's always a gamble because NFL systems are so unique. Coaches use players in different ways. Whenever you're paying big money to bring in a guy from another team, whether it's a Trumaine Johnson or a CJ Mosley, you're not always sure they're necessarily going to be the best fit for your team. And sometimes it works out well, but sometimes it doesn't. I would much rather spend that big money keeping a guy that fits in your team, fits your system, fits in your locker room. It's just a good move all the way around. I'm a big proponent of drafting and developing players. I really do believe that in the NFL, the way to win is primarily through homegrown talent. I'm not saying you ignore free agency completely. I'm not saying you ignore trades completely, but it's tough to find impact players in free agency. And you can find them in trades, but it's not, the great players, a lot of them don't become available until they're later on in their career and they're kind of past their prime. The way to have the way to guarantee yourself that you can get a star player in his prime is to draft him and develop him and then keep him. No more of these trades, no more getting rid of the good players for the Jets. So I think the Jets did well here. I think you give the Jets credit here for making this happen, for not dragging this out. It would have been easy to drag this out and just, again, kind of have a reactive mindset instead of a proactive mindset. They were able to get this contract done, and Quinnen Williams is now going to be with the Jets for really the prime of his career. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll continue talking about this Quinnen Williams contract extension. We'll get into the economics. We'll get into the nuts and bolts of the dollars, what it means for the Jets moving forward. That's as we continue this Friday edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by eBay Motors. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for a draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we are going to provide you with players who are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So with draft prep underway for the upcoming season, let's see who Vinny has picked out for us on this week's eBay Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. When on the clock for the first overall pick in fantasy drafts, it's okay to get downright giddy about doing the gritty. That means picking Vikings wide receiver Justin Jefferson. He's a guaranteed fit. Over the last two seasons, Jefferson led the league in both receptions and receiving yards. he will remain a dominant number one receiver and target monster, in part because the Vikings don't play the Jets this year, so he doesn't have to face Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. With that in mind, Jefferson is a guaranteed fit to ignite the rest of your fantasy football lineup towards winning success. Vinny Iyer from Locked On Fantasy Football is going to help you win your championship, and eBay Motors knows a championship team is all about each player being a perfect fit. It's the same with your vehicle. With eBay Guaranteed Fit and over 122 million parts and accessories for your vehicle right at your fingertips, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Air filters, brakes, batteries, taillights, alternators, shocks, struts, you name it. eBay Motors has it. And they will make sure it's the right fit for your car because eBay Guaranteed Fit helps you understand exactly which part you need for your vehicle the first time. So go forth, switch gears, crank the AC, and say goodbye to sweating if your ride needs a little fixing up, because now you'll always be set up for success from the get-go. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, everything your vehicle needs is just a click away. For the parts and accessories that fit your vehicle, just look for the green check. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. You everydayers, you folks who tune into the show Monday through Friday, I have some exciting news for you. This is our final week of the summer schedule. Monday, the Jets are going to be arriving in training camp shortly. Monday, we begin our normal, regular scheduled programming. We'll have episodes with you Monday through Friday, through the season, through the off season. I can't wait to get this season underway. But today we're talking about Quinnen Williams. The Jets kind of took care of some housekeeping, and they signed their best player to a 4-year contract extension, $96 million, $66 million guaranteed. There's no way around. This is a huge contract. This is an enormous contract for Quinnen Williams. If you look at it on an annual salary basis, the average annual salary for Quinnen Williams, he is now the second highest paid interior defensive lineman in the NFL behind Aaron Donald. At $24 million a year, he comes in just ahead of Jeffrey Simmons of Tennessee, who just recently signed an extension, a big money deal for Quinnen Williams. Is he worth it? Should he be the second highest paid interior defensive lineman in the league? Well, let me put it this way. He was an all-pro last year, which means he's one of the top defensive linemen in the NFL. I think in a situation like this, it's very easy to get carried away with the finances and say, oh, couldn't they have gotten him for maybe $2 million less a year? Or couldn't we have guaranteed $5 million less? And my response to you is relax. This is a league where the salary cap is now over $200 million. A few million here, a few million there for a great player. I'm not talking about, an average player, because the Jets have gotten themselves into trouble through the years in free agency by paying guys who really aren't that great and stretching for them. This is the type of player you stretch to keep. And is Quinnen Williams worth the money? Well, yeah, if he plays the way he did last year, where he's a 12-sack guy, where he's an all-pro, where he's a Pro Bowler, he's absolutely worth the money. The way I kind of view it, I think you kind of have to put players in tiers. And right now, Quinnen Williams is in that top tier. Is he the best interior defensive lineman in the NFL? Well, maybe not, but he's close. So him making that contract, him being the highest paid interior defensive lineman who's not Aaron Donald, is that the type of deal you can live with? I think absolutely. And people look at the $66 million guaranteed is an awful lot of money. And that's, you usually do not see a contract with that much guaranteed money in the NFL. Well, my response to that is guaranteed money. And we kind of obsess over the way contracts are structured when players sign them. We say, is that a good structure? Is that a bad structure? Contract structure really only matters if you're going to get rid of a player, if you think a player is going to be cut, because that determines how much dead money you've got. If you are planning on keeping a player for the entire duration of his contract, the amount of money guaranteed doesn't really matter because he's getting the full contract anyway. If Quinnen Williams plays out these 4 years with the Jets, he's getting $96 million. So you won't care that you guaranteed him $66 million. So I do think it matters for a player who's of lesser caliber. I think it matters when you're signing, an average player, like an Allen Lazard or somebody like that, or maybe a Mecole Hardman. I think for guys like that, you worry a little bit more about structure because of something I mentioned earlier, where they played with a different team. They may have a different role, maybe not Lazard this year, but they may have a different role than what they're accustomed to. Are they going to fit? And you kind of are taking a gamble by signing them. I think with Quinnen Williams, there's less of a gamble because he fits the system really well because he just had an all-pro campaign back in 2022. So I don't worry as much about the guaranteed money. The other aspect that comes into this is that every single year in the NFL, you see a new record-setting contract. And that's because the cap keeps going up, and the cap's going to continue to go up. And the reason for that is this is actually the first year of the NFL's new TV deal. So the NFL's TV contract expired last year. The new TV deal, roughly is going to double the NFL's TV revenue over the next decade. So you'll see the cap continue to go up because the salary cap is essentially a percentage of the revenue the NFL makes. And when when you hear about negotiations to avoid a strike or a lockout that comes up every couple of years, you hear about the collective bargaining agreement. That's essentially the players and owners agreeing this percentage of revenue goes to the players. And that's kind of what sets the salary cap for a given season. And it's an extreme oversimplification, but that's kind of how it goes. Now you can this is another thing you can get carried away with, because I've seen the rising cap used to justify some really bad contracts where people say, well, the cap's going to rise. It doesn't matter. The cap always matters. If the cap's going up for the Jets, it's going up for everybody else too. But for a great player, what somebody signed for 2 years ago at the defensive tackle position, that doesn't matter, because you have to look at it as a percentage of the cap. And I think that this is a fair deal for Quinnen Williams. I think that if you look in the years ahead, we're gonna say that this is a fair deal as long as Quinnen continues to perform at a very high level. And I know he's been a bit up and down during his career. It really feels to me like he started to put the pieces together last year, where it felt to me like it was less of a kind of a fluke year and more that Quinnen Williams was really figuring out how to play in this league. So I don't worry about the finances. I think that there's a tendency whenever there's a big money deal to just panic because it's a big money deal, because on some level, there's always a degree of uncertainty when you give a player big money. Muhammad Wilkerson back in 2016, the Jets gave him big money and he kind of stopped producing right there. Yeah, look, there's always some degree of risk whenever you sign a player, but would you not rather take a risk with the guy who is great, who is one of the best players at his position in the NFL, a guy who's one of the best players, period, in the NFL, who fits your system well, who's in your locker room, who is a good fit there? If you're going to gamble on big money, if you're going to give out that that market resetting contract, wouldn't you rather give it out to a player like that, like a Quinnen Williams, than just roll the dice on a Trumaine Johnson like the Jets did a couple of years ago, or CJ Mosley? To me, that makes way more sense because you just know he fits well. And I mean, the other aspect of this is the Jets know Quinnen Williams' work ethic. And I think that's a big advantage. I think that's something that we kind of ignore when we talk about bringing in outside free agents. You don't really know those guys that well. Maybe you have somebody on your staff who worked with them in a previous place, but when you're bringing in a guy from an outside, you don't know what drives them. With a guy like Quinnen Williams, the Jets have had a chance to observe him up close, and they see his work ethic, and they can kind of figure out how he's going to respond to a new contract. This is the type of guy who's going to keep working hard, who's going to keep striving to be great. And that's the reason. That's another reason that I just think this is the type of guy you give big money to. Now, of course, with big money comes big expectations. As we continue on this Friday edition of the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about what's on Quinnen Williams' plate right now. How good do the Jets need him to be? Very good. We'll discuss in more detail ahead here on the Friday Locked On Jets podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Let me tell you something about Bird Dogs. They make you look good. Bird Dog stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. I mean, I don't know if you've seen any of the pictures of Aaron Rodgers, how he's been bulking up this offseason. I don't know if Bird Dog's going to make you look quite that good, but it's going to make you look really good. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but they fit way better. They fit way better than regular shorts that are made of a stiff, restricting cotton. Bird Dogs fixed the issue by inventing Cloud Knit fabric that looks just like khaki but stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. And Bird Dogs uses anti-stick sweating wicking fabric that helps you cool and dry all day long. I'll tell you, you're going to look great in Bird Dog shorts. I may not be the most fashionable guy, but Bird Dogs I think could even make me look good. What should you do? You should go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL right now, or enter promo code LockedOnNFL for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. Again, that's birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL or promo code LockedOnNFL for a free Yeti style tumbler. I mean, how good is that? You get great Bird Dogs and you get a Yeti style tumbler by using promo code LockedOnNFL. Trust me, you won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. Here on this Friday, we're talking about the Quinnen Williams contract extension. I was going to do a mailbag show today. The Jets, however, had other ideas, and I'm delighted that they had other ideas because they got one of the most pressing issues the team had off the table, and they ensured that Quinnen Williams will remain a member of the New York Jets through his prime years, which I think just began last year. Quinnen Williams turned into a star last year, and I have to say I did not see that coming. And I was somebody, if you listen to my podcast over the last couple of years, I was a Quinnen Williams defender because I think in the fan base, there was a large group who said, well, yeah, he's a good player, but we drafted him to be great. And I think even at 3 overall, it's a lot to ask a player. You know, 3 overall, if you get a good player, you've still done pretty well. I don't think people appreciate how difficult it is to find players in the draft, or at least how big the miss rate is, even as high as 3 overall. So I think if you get a very good player, as Quinnen Williams was through most of his first 3 seasons, you've done well. But last year, Quinnen Williams took it to another level. And we actually saw flashes of that late in the 2020 season before he got injured on a really hopeless Jets team otherwise. Quinnen Williams was playing at a Pro Bowl level. He really kind of rounded into gear the second half of that 2020 season. Then he ended it with an injury. 2021 came around, and again, he was good, but on a bad defense, he wasn't great, where he did not have much around him. 2022, he took his game to the next level. And now, unlike when you draft a guy 3 overall, when you get a contract like that, the expectation is you got to be great. I mean, Quinnen Williams is not being paid the second highest average annual salary at the interior defensive line spot in the league just to be very good. The good news is I think he's up to it. You can look at a season like Quinnen Williams had last year in one of 2 ways. You could say, well, that's his career year. He's not going to be any better than that. Everything clicked for him last year, but it's not, he's not going to have the same, he's not going to have everything fall into place from the same way. It's just, every player has that one great season, the best year of their career, and they're never the same after that. And that's possible, but I kind of view it differently. I think Quinnen Williams has kind of figured it out last year. And I don't think that this was a fluke. And, we'll see what happens. I could very well be wrong. I'm wrong about a lot of things, but for me, Quinnen Williams he understands how to play the game. And I think we don't appreciate the mental side of the game enough. I think we see guys who are extremely athletic, and you see it at all different positions. You see a wide receiver who has blazing speed. Does he know how to run routes, though? That's the thing that's going to determine whether or not he has success. You see offensive linemen, you see the highlight reels where they throw a pancake block or they push a guy 5 yards down the field. Do they have consistent technique from play to play, though? Is their hand placement where it needs to be consistently? Do they have good footwork? If you're at the tackle position, do you overset or do you set properly? Do you lean? And at the defensive tackle spot, it's easy to see a guy, maybe a team blows a blocking assignment. Maybe somebody misses a block. Maybe you just get a schedule of offensive linemen who aren't that good. Or do you have a refined set of pass rushing moves? And Quinnen Williams does. And one of the things you see when guys come into the NFL originally is a lot of them don't even have a first move. A lot of them are just pure athletes, and they dominated in college because they're going up against guys who are well below NFL caliber. And in college, you can just physically overwhelm a guy. If you're more athletic than somebody, you don't need good technique. You get to the NFL, you really do need good technique because everybody's good. Everybody's a great athlete. And a lot of guys struggle. And even for guys who make it, maybe that first year or two, they don't really do a whole lot. And if they get good coaching, then they could turn into good players. Some guys enter the NFL and they have like one move. They have one pass rushing move. And then after that, if that first move gets stalled, they're finished. And they have to develop that second move. Quinnen Williams does what I call, he plays the run and rushes the passer with a plan, where he already kind of anticipates what the offensive lineman is going to do. So he has his plan A, he has his first move. If that doesn't work, he goes to plan B. He does, okay, if this guy does this, I'll do that. And that's why I feel like this is sustainable. And Quinnen Williams is a critical player for this defense. I've said this so many times over the last 2 years, and I think it's true, so I will say it again. On defense in the NFL, if I can only be good at 2 spots, I want to be good on the defensive line, and I want to be good at corner, because shutting down the pass is the most critical thing. So you want defensive linemen who can get after the quarterback, and you want corners who can cover. The Jets have both. Jets have maybe the best group of corners in the NFL, led by Sauce Gardner, who this year, I mean, if he was not the best corner in the NFL last year as a rookie, he was close. And this year, it's not going to take that far for him to get there. In fact, Sauce Gardner's at a point where I don't think teams are going to throw at him. I think he's already got that reputation. Revis did not have that reputation until year 4. Sauce Gardner's got it heading into year 2, where teams are just not going to throw his way. And then you have DJ Reed, you have Michael Carter II, the sequel in the slot. You got good corners. On the defensive line, the Jets have a lot of talent. You've got you can name the guys. You can list them off. Carl Lawson, Bryce Huff, who was a good situational guy. John Franklin Myers, Jermaine Johnson, Will McDonald, a couple of recent first-round picks. You've got a lot of talent. Quinnen Williams is the one great player, though, up front for the Jets. And I think he makes everybody's life so much easier because you worry so much about Quinnen Williams if you're an opposing offensive coordinator. Then that means the guy next to him is always going to see single teams. Because in the NFL, the way the Jets run is, Jets have 4 defensive linemen on most plays. They're going up against 5 offensive linemen. So generally speaking, one of the 2 tackles is going to draw a double team on a given play. And that guy's almost always going to be Quinnen Williams with the Jets, which means the guy next to Quinnen Williams, his life's going to be a lot easier because he's just going to get a one-on-one all the time. And Quinnen Williams can still beat double teams. So the expectations are still very high for Quinnen Williams because of how great he is, because of what he brings to the table, both physically and mentally. So I have every expectation that Quinnen Williams is going to remain great. That's what the expectation should be when you get this contract. He's earned this contract. This is a contract that I think is very fair for both sides. I think Quinnen Williams deserves to be paid. And for me, when you've got a player in the NFL who's earned a new contract, give him a new contract. Don't mess around with it. So kudos to the Jets for doing this. And it's been one of my longest running complaints about this team. And it's been under multiple GMs. So I think it goes back to the owner. Thank you, Jets, for doing this because they needed. I'm so happy that this did not turn into a really acrimonious situation. I'm glad that the Jets finally were a little proactive in the situation like this. And Quinnen Williams is now going to be a Jet for years to come. That's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. Give the show a 5-star review if you're listening on a podcast source, or a big thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. These things help us out and help other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. We're back full-time on Monday through Friday, starting next week. Can't wait.